Welcome to the Mission After Microdosing course. I'm your guide, Mike Bledsoe. I put this course together because I get a ton of questions from veterans all the time about psychedelics and microdosing and all sorts of things, because the word is getting around that these things can be really, really beneficial. So I'm going to kick this off with a story about how I got into psilocybin mushrooms. There's going to be many points in the story that you can learn something for yourself. This is something that happened for me back in 2013. So this is 11 years ago now. And so it was just the beginning. So I want to tell you a little story. It's going to point out some key points. And it all starts off with a mushroom journey in a dog park in Memphis, Tennessee. Very unlikely place for a transformative experience to happen. And it occurred for me. Now, some things to notice and to note here is that I was really set up for success in a lot of different ways. Most people's first time with mushrooms involves a party, drinking beer, or they're at a festival around a bunch of different people and they consume some mushrooms and they have a quote unquote bad experience, really a challenging experience. And those are the stories that usually keep people from trying out psilocybin mushrooms. And I totally get it. I got out in 2005, and between 2005 and 2013, I had no interest in doing anything other than drinking alcohol and smoking some cannabis here and there. Everything else was a no way for me. And so, and I got out in 2005. In 2007, I opened a CrossFit gym, and in 2012, I started a podcast. Now, on paper, I had achieved some success. I was a successful CrossFit gym owner. I made enough money to buy a house. I had started a podcast. I had gained a lot of notoriety in the CrossFit space. So I was married, had the house. I had all these things. On paper, it looked like I was a veteran who had done really well for himself. But I was 8 years into this experience of being a veteran, and I still had a lot of dissatisfaction. I thought to myself, can this really just be it? And so in an attempt to make myself feel better and to enjoy life more, I just kept achieving. And I imagine for yourself and for a lot of other veterans, it's like achieve, and then I'll feel happy. I'll experience peace. And it just wasn't happening for me. So in an attempt to achieve more, I had purchased a ticket to a marketing conference in Chicago, Illinois. It was $7,000. It was the last $7,000 that I had. Even though I was making money, I wasn't making that kind of money. So I go to this marketing conference and I go, you know what? I'm going to get something out of here that's going to really help me in my business. And I did. I learned a lot there that helped me in my business, that allowed me to make a lot more money. But the more important thing I got there was, it was day 3, and I'm a straight A student. And so I'm always able to learn and understand and pride myself on that. And on day 3 of this conference, we did an empathy exercise, which is not a thinking cognitive exercise. And I was partnered up with somebody and I failed miserably. I just drew blanks and blanks and blanks. After that exercise, I left the conference room and I went to my hotel room, and I didn't return back to the conference the rest of the day, even though I'd spent all that money on it. It had really taken a toll on me. I went and watched a movie, and I go, you know what? Now that this empathy stuff is over, I don't really need that anyway. I went back to the conference and I learned more. Now, at this conference, I was really fortunate because there was this really subtle psychedelic theme that triggered in me to go, hey, maybe I should eat some mushrooms when I get home. And I had heard some podcasts where some well-known entrepreneurs had talked about the benefits of mushrooms. And so I go, okay, if they're successful in business, then I can eat some mushrooms and maybe it'll make me successful in business too. I get 2.5 grams of what's called golden teacher mushrooms. I get 2.5 grams. I consume them. I go to a dog park. It's a really big dog park. I'm on top of this hill. I lay out. I've got my business journal. I got my journal from the conference. And my thought was, I'm going to take these mushrooms and then I'm going to open up this journal, and then all the business stuff that I learned last week is going to make more sense to me. I'm going to know exactly what to do with it. So I take the mushrooms. I got lucky in that I had met a psychedelic musician, and I put on his playlist because I said, well, why not? Laid out a blanket and the mushrooms started to kick in. Now, I never opened the journal that day. It was really funny. I never opened the journal that day. I laid in the park. I listened to music, and I started to experience joy and bliss at a level I had never experienced before. And so I pulled two lessons out of this particular experience that are extremely notable, well, maybe three. But the first thing that happened during the experience is I'm laying in the field and I'm looking up at the sky, and all of a sudden the whole sky goes fractal and it goes into geometric patterns. And I go, wow, this is just really incredible. It's just awe-inspiring. And then moments later, the entire world fell down inside of my own body, inside of my own head. And I realized in that moment I had this experience. It's experiential. It's one thing to tell you this and for you to get it cognitively. It's another thing to have the experience of the whole world falling in. And I was realizing that moment that everything that I was perceiving out in the world was actually an interpretation of my senses. And I had a real life experience of, oh, I'm not actually touching this world in the way that I think I am. I'm experiencing it in a different way. And I started to realize that how I saw the world was different than the world was actually existing, and that I had a filter in place. I also realized in that moment that I was 100% responsible for what I'm creating in my world. Now, that may seem a little crazy because a lot of times we want to point the finger at other people for creating the world that we live in. But this level of personal responsibility is what's necessary to make real, deep, long-lasting change. And I had this moment. I go, oh, the point in my life I'm in right now is a product of every choice I've made up until this point. That's it. Personal responsibility. As much as I want to blame my parents or blame somebody else or some situation, the reality is this moment was primarily constructed by my choices up until this point. And it just landed in a really big way in that moment. So that realization gave me a lot of hope. It gave me a lot of inspiration. I go, if the choices that I made are the ones that got me here, all I've got to do is make new choices to get me somewhere else. And so I realized that, and that brought me a lot of joy. And I cried and was really happy and really inspired to go home and make those changes. The second thing that happened, the second big lesson that happened for me is after I had peaked on this mushroom experience, I'm sitting at the top of this hill and people are starting, it's a Tuesday afternoon, people are starting to get off of work, and they get off of work and they're bringing their dogs to the dog park. And I'm imagining that these dogs have been inside their house, or they've been in a kennel, or they've been without human connection all day. And now their humans have gone home, they picked up their dogs and they take them to the dog park. But the problem is they're on their phone, they're talking to somebody else, they're barely paying attention to the dog. They're on their phone and throwing the stick and all this. The dog is still not getting their undivided attention. And I'm sitting on top of this hill and I'm getting angry with the people that are bringing their dogs. And I go, don't you know that these dogs have been kept inside and now you're not giving them your full attention? I had a lot of empathy for the dogs. I was like, oh my gosh, this is an experience I had never had before. Empathy was coming online. This thing I had learned, or I tried to learn, I didn't think I was learning in the conference, now started to land for me. And then I noticed, oh my gosh, I bring my dog to this dog park and I do the same thing. And I realized, oh, I am just as at fault as the people that are here in this dog park right now. And I felt a level of sadness. I went from anger to feeling sad that I do the same thing. And then I realized I do the same thing to my mother. I do the same thing to my clients in the gym. I do the same thing to my wife. I am not giving anyone my undivided attention. I'm not listening to them. I am literally waiting for someone to stop talking so I can tell them everything that I know. Up until this point, I thought that if people disagreed with me, they didn't understand, they were stupid, whatever it was. That was the world that I was living in. So I really couldn't hear what other people had to tell me unless I felt that they agreed with me first. And so it really landed me in that moment. I'm crying. I'm really sad. And then I got to move into a place of joy because I realized, you know what? I can make a new choice starting right now. All right. That was super motivating. I can make a new choice right now, and I can go home and I can start listening to people. And after the psilocybin mushrooms had, worn off to a degree, I lived a half mile from the park. I jumped in my Jeep and I go home, and my wife gets off work, and she comes home, and I start asking her questions about her day. Within a few minutes, she starts crying. I didn't tell her anything about what had happened that day. She starts crying, and the reason she started crying is because this was the first time I had actually sat down and really listened to her. Normally, I might ask her how her day was going and then start ranting about my own day or interjecting in some way, instead of actually being curious, actually wanting to experience her world and empathize with her. So these are two really big lessons I got out of that first mushroom experience. And I was really fortunate because a lot of people don't get that their first time. There's a key point on why I was able to have that experience. I'm going to share that with you as well. Now, that night, when I was home, I was really scared that this psilocybin mushroom experience, the mushrooms were going to wear off. I was going to wake up in the morning and I was going to be the old Mike that was pre-dog park. But when I woke up the next morning, that wasn't true. I was still curious about other people. I had become permanently empathetic. I had reached a new level emotionally. My emotional development had begun in that moment. That was just the start. And the big takeaway I want to share with you here is a lot of people do eat mushrooms, but they don't learn much in their mushroom experience. And the key point here is I had gone to a business marketing development program the week before that had a lot of personal development embedded in it. That empathy exercise was a personal development exercise. So I had been primed. I call it priming. I had been primed perfectly to learn the lesson of empathy. There were also conversations at the conference about taking 100% responsibility. And so because I was primed with these lessons and I was open and I was desiring to learn more, and I had gone out to a place where I was in isolation, I was able to be by myself, feel safe out in this field, and had the intention of getting something out of the experience. That's what allowed that to happen. Most people are using psychedelics or using mushrooms in an unconscious manner or unintentional manner. They go, oh, this will just make me feel better. But you really need to get primed and get primed by people who know what they're talking about and know how to prime you in the right way. And that's exactly what I got to experience at that conference. So I got lucky. I got lucky in a lot of ways, and that I did it right the first time. Most people do not do it right the first time, and they end up having a less than desirable experience, or they don't feel like much of anything happened at all. So it's important that we couple personal development work with the use of psychedelics. Most people are only using psychedelics and they lean on it, and they have to keep going back to psychedelics over and over and over again in order to have the transformation that they're experiencing. But I'm a big fan of being able to harvest a single experience to the greatest degree. And we do that by priming, and we do that by integration as well. Because I had a background in health and fitness, and I understood training, I was able to adapt those same principles of learning how to squat and deadlift and do pull-ups to how I was operating in my own mind. Now, this wasn't the end of my journey. I didn't have the big one, aha, and then just stop there. I kept experimenting with mushrooms. This is 2013, so there weren't a lot of resources out there. I didn't know anyone else that was really doing it, aside from the guy that I got in the mushrooms from. And he was really good, but he was limited. He hadn't done a lot of personal development. And so it's really important that you get that point, because as you're going through this course, we're going to be covering aspects of microdosing, the use of psilocybin mushrooms in really small doses and subperceptual doses. So I tell you that story about a macro dose. That's like a bigger dose to have a really large insight, to have a big realization. That's really, really valuable. But I imagine and I don't recommend people do that on their own the way that I did it. I recommend that you do it with somebody who has a lot of experience. So a lot of times in the meantime, people they may have some fear around mushrooms. And here's the thing is, if we microdose, we take something between 0.08 and 0.15 grams of mushrooms at a time, it'll be either sub-perceptual or things just might seem a little bit brighter. All right. And so the benefits of these mushrooms is that they get into your system and they make you more, you may have heard the term more neuroplastic. Your ability to change how you think goes up, not just the day of, but the days following. And so it increases things like BDNF, certain neurotransmitters in the brain that are responsible for learning new ways of being, new ways of doing things. It's good for skill development as well. And so in this course, we're going to be covering all that. And in microdoses, instead of having a huge shift all at once, we're going to talk about how to have small shifts over time so it's less disruptive to your life and you can have incremental changes to how you're feeling. Now, we've had clients that started microdosing protocols that the first day, chronic pain in their hip vanished. You know, there was somebody who was training a lot and their hip was always bothering them, which was leading to lower back pain. First day of microdosing went away. Now, I'm not promising it's going to make chronic pain go away, but the mind and the body are one. We'd like to dissect them up into one or the other, but the truth is it's just one whole system. And that's why when you take something for your body, it impacts the mind. And so my recommendation is, and I'm going to remind you this throughout the course, my recommendation is to get the most out of microdosing is to be microdosing while you're participating in some personal development course. And that's one reason we have our 90-day mentorship program here at the Mission After. I recommend that coupling these two things would be really beneficial to you. Now, if you want to simply microdose and do some journaling or do some other personal development program or practice meditation, great. You don't have to do our program, but I recommend that you're doing something outside of just taking some pills or some chocolates or wherever it is that you're going to get your microdosing materials from, which we're going to get into this course. Whatever you're doing, couple that with an intention of improving some area of your life. Okay. So in this course, we're going to talk about the legal aspects, things to consider with that. We're going to talk about how to make microdoses. We're going to talk about how to take them, how frequently to take them, how much to take of them. You're going to know exactly how to microdose, and we're going to have different microdosing protocols based on your particular situation and what it is that you're wanting to achieve. So whatever your intention is, there's going to be a different type of protocol for that intention. So I really appreciate you sticking around, hearing my personal story with psilocybin mushrooms. That was just the beginning. It's been 11 years where I've been progressively getting into other psychedelic medicines, learning all sorts of new tools. And I promise you, for everything that I suggest or teach you, there's probably 10 things that I'm leaving out because I tried it and it just didn't work as well. Either it didn't work at all or it didn't work as well. I'm only giving you the best stuff that I've found over the last 11 years of digging deep into personal development, hiring coaches, and enrolling in leadership development programs. Not half of the stuff I do is psychedelic. The other half has been things that are non-psychedelic. And that's the huge benefit here. So thanks for joining us for this course. I look forward to hearing your feedback. You have access to the community so you can have conversations, ask questions. And I recommend going all the way through the course. I'm going to try to make it as digestible and easy as possible. And if you have recommendations on how we can make it better, just drop it into the school community chat and we'll do our best to make those changes for you. See you in the next chapter.